Identity and Politics, a presentation by Kashvi Gera. Identity politics is often naively understood. It is seen as one-dimensional. Political movements usually focus on the issues and complexities within one structure of identity. Example, the civil rights movement and the feminist movement. Identity politics is largely ignores overlapping identity structures. Kimberly Crenshaw challenges this notion, and she argues that it is in fact intersectional, and that political problems reflect overlapping structures of oppression. Her focus is specifically on women of color, the feminist movement, and the civil rights movement. Crenshaw helps to reveal the flaws in the single-axis politics through the intersectional identity of women of color. Intersectionality is a way to understanding how multiple forms of inequality can sometimes compound to create struggles that aren't typically understood. Crenshaw discovers three types of intersectionality, namely being structural intersectionality, political intersectionality, and finally, cultural and representational intersectionality. Crenshaw, in her work, exposes the systematic exclusions in policy, society, and misrepresentations in popular culture, using women of color as the center of her argument for intersectionality. From this analysis, Crenshaw wants us to see how the women of color, battling two separate identity structures, view the world around them, politically and socially. I believe we should extend Crenshaw's theory of intersectionality. Intersectionality should be understood not as a framework limited to women of color, but as a wholesale theory of identity. Because individuals occupy multiple overlapping identity structures, political understanding itself is shaped by those intersections, rather than by any single identity category. Crenshaw details the experiences of white women and men of color to explain intersectionality for women of color. However, white women with racial privilege and men of color with gender privilege also contain intersectional identities, which shape their specific understanding of politics uniquely and differently from women of color. Accordingly, if intersectionality is a wholesale theory of identity, then everyone has a unique intersectional identity. Every identity structure shapes political understanding, even identity structures that typically contain levels of privilege. Privilege doesn't cancel out overlapping identities, it just changes how power operates around them. Let's consider working class white Americans who hold both racial privilege and economic marginalization. Due to their national identity and race, they can feel represented by a majority white government. Due to their lack of economic security, they can also feel unrepresented by a majority upper class government. This might shape a political understanding of possible resentment towards elites in government, a lack of acknowledgement and understanding of racial justice, and ultimately a belief that the government protects others while ignoring them. Even individuals who hold racial privilege cannot be explained through a single lens access. We can see that Crenshaw gives a similar example, white women in the feminist movement. The structural identity that grants them privilege, their race, didn't allow them to consider the struggles that other women of color may face. The Violence Against Women Act in 1991 successfully highlighted many white women victims, while not highlighting women of color victims. We can also take a look at undocumented immigrants and their intersectional identity, which is structured by class and legal status. They are incorporated in the American economy as low-wage workers, but cannot participate in politics due to their citizenship status. They are actively being affected by these policies, but are unrepresented. Because undocumented immigrants must work within state-regulated systems, they have involvement with police, courts, bureaucracies, and more, but this can threaten their safety. This creates a political understanding where survival requires caution, invisibility, and fear of the government instead of participation. This affects the extent to which people can safely participate in politics. Crenshaw gives an example of this when she details the language barriers that prevent some women of color from receiving the waiver created by the Immigration Act of 1990. If there is an undocumented status, Crenshaw rightly points out that this lack of access to resources makes it more dangerous, especially in cases of domestic violence. We can also take into account religious worldviews and atheist worldviews, which can be seen through the Muslim minority in India. Hindu nationalism dominates many parts of Indian identity through history, culture, and politics. As a result, Muslims are formally included as citizens but may feel excluded in their national Indian community. Ultimately, Muslims in India often understand politics with a less neutral viewpoint and instead focus their energies on increasing representation for Muslims in India. It becomes a site where loyalty must be must also be constantly demonstrated. From this, we can see that political understanding is also further shaped by position within identity structure, not by abstract citizenship alone. Crenshaw's example of the two life crew controversy is comparable. Critics focused on either race or gender, ignoring how Black women were uniquely affected. We can see that in India, debates about nationalism often spotlight Hindu identity, while actively forgetting the perspectives of Muslim communities and their political understanding. But why does this matter? If we understand that intersectional identities shape political understanding, regardless of privilege and dependent on both specific position within identity structures and participation in government, then one can reasonably conclude that in order to cultivate solidarity, there must be a recognition of different intersectional identities and, respectively, their political understandings. This epistemic view on democracy explains that democracy thrives when all diverse voices are included in the conversation, when everyone has a seat at the table. Crenshaw highlighted the systematic failures that people overlook when it comes to people of color, but this exists with many intersectional identities, so we must consider all these identities to avoid all these systematic failures. Additionally, there is another reason to recognize intersectionality's importance. On the one hand, including diverse voices creates its diverse political atmosphere, but on the other hand, if you do not, it can lead to conflict and instability because it most likely will fail to protect marginalized groups and instigate political danger to those groups. Ultimately, while Crenshaw started the conversation of intersectionality, it is important to continue it to all identity structures, not just women of color. The solution is inclusion, especially in the current politically heated society. People should try to understand all intersectional political understandings. Thank you.